Turn it over to him. Thank you very much, Terry.
I apologize. I didn't do this to copy everybody else, but you've seen about every slide I've got, so, from the first two speakers. But this picture here was taken about the 24th of June. This is some of my summer stockpile. What I like about it, if you'd looked at this pasture last year, it wouldn't have had any clover. This was the best frost seeding year I've ever had. My farm's really three different farms. The home farm of owned and rented lands, around 360 acres of grass, and we have 45 permanent paddocks. And then the Harmon farm, I'll talk more about later, it's 220 acres of pasture with 22 paddocks. And then these two farms here are out in the edge of Carroll County on the Parkway. They're summer pastures. And one farm, that small farm, I just have continuous grazing. It wasn't really worth as much money as it was going to take to get the water where I needed it. But the home farm, it's kind of like a revolving door. I'll bring cattle in the winter and feed them there, and in the spring I'll haul them out to the bottom two farms. I'll wean all my calves and bring them back in, background them on this farm. And I used to make a lot of hay on it. Last year I made 20 acres. I'm not sure I'm going to make any this year. And then the Harmon farm, I've got it stocked with Robert Shoemaker, 3 acre per cow. And then I'll wean the calves in June. My goals, I want to graze 300 or more days per year, and I want to produce cattle that'll work in all segments. We send our cattle to feed, and I want them to do there and grade. And I like to try to maintain maximum profit per cow, and I don't have it up there, but I also want to have a little time so I don't have to work all the time either. The cattle herd, have around 140 commercial cows. These calve, I used to call it fall, but I'm summer calving. I calve in August and September. And they're Angus, Hereford Cross, and Simmental. And then my brother, he got smart and he decided he wanted something to retire on, so he started buying polled Herefords, and I'm keeping them for him. We got 25 registered polled Hereford cows. And then generally we will have 50 to 60 bred heifers. This picture here was taken the 9th of June. That's what I weaned my calves in. These calves have been weaned one day. We used total AI on all cows and heifers one time. Retained ownership on the calves. And I try to use pasture as much as possible in the backgrounding of these calves. I'll give them a little bit of supplement, maybe 2 to 3 weeks before they go to the feed yard, just to get them used to eating some. This is that same bunch of calves. This is how I wean. This is Fenceline weaning. You can see that's a 8-strand high tensile with a hot wire down the middle. And if you notice, just about everything's grazing. This is a day after I weaned them. It's really low stress on me, and I know it's low stress on the cattle, but if they get out, they get back with their mothers. So I have been known to wean them and not go check on them for about 7, 8 days, and they're usually good and weaned by then. But I got this title, Why I Try to Extend the Grazing Season. I think the hardest thing is just people decide they want to do it, because people think you are nuts. I remember the first time I started grazing some hayland, I came home and wife said, "Cows got in the hay," and we went and got them out because we knew you'd be mad. I said, "Well, I opened the gate and turned them in." Ever since then, she just lets them go, and if they're out, I have to get them in by myself. But one reason I want to extend it, because this is going to be the most controversial thing I say. Shoot, I like paying income tax. I've had one job for 6 months after I got out of high school, and everything else has been on cattle. So it's kind of nice now to have to write a check because I'm making a little bit of money. This is going to be some of what was covered earlier, but I started keeping up with what it cost whenever I was doing stockpiled conventional and putting nitrogen down. And we'll go through it pretty quick. I applied 50 pounds of nitrogen. I got 93 days. And I got the fertilizer and $4 per cow for poly wire and 10 cents per day to move it. And it came to 97 cents a day. Then the next year I applied nitrogen and phosphate. And I got 10 more cow days, but it cost me $30-some, close to $40 more per acre. That cost me $1.28 that year. And daily cost, this is what I figured it's cost me to feed hay. If I buy the hay or make my own, it seems like I have $38, $39 a roll. And these are 4x5 bales weighing 750, 800 pounds. And I can feed 26 cows on a bale, and I've got 25 cents a day for the tractor and 10 cents for the labor. So it came out to $1.85 is what I figured it cost me on the average day to feed a cow hay. So in 2007, I saved 88 cents a day the days I was grazing. This was with nitrogen. Had for 160 cows and average 75 per cow, 75 days, it came to $10,578. I figured I saved that year. Next year I grazed 10 more days, but my pasture cost a lot more, and I only figured I saved $7,500. So it kind of looked like I was going backwards. Well, in 2009, it just snowed every day. And so for about from the 15th of December to the 1st of March, we had a foot of snow on the ground and never got over 30 degrees daytime high, so it was no grazing that winter. And then in 2010, I was able to rent the Harmon farm, and part of the pasture I put nitrogen on, part I didn't, so my records were kind of incomplete on that year. So in 2011, I didn't apply any nitrogen. And I averaged 60 cow days, which really, I was talking to him. It's funny, I came out the same number he was figuring, about 40 days less with no fertilizer. And I've got the $4 poly wire and 10 cents labor. So actually, I figured it was costing me 26 cents a day to feed them that stockpile with no nitrogen. And since I knew that Mike Gowasher was going to be here and he'd question me on this, I put a 28 cents rent cost per day. So I figured 52 cents a day is what I probably had in them, which I'm probably a little bit low because I don't have any fixed costs. I told him, I said, I don't have anything fixed. All my stuff's broken. So I'm figuring the savings with no fertilizer, and I pulled the rent cost out because if I fed them hay on that same land, I figured I had the same rent cost in them as if I was grazing them. So I just figured what it was costing me to move the fence, and that came to $1.59 a day for 100 days, 157 cows. Well, that got to be pretty interesting. I figure I saved close to $25,000 last winter, which remember that because when I get in some of these budgets, that's what I expect my cow herd to pay me a year is $25,000 in labor. So I figure I came close to saving that just by not having to feed as much hay. And the 300 days of grazing, in 2010, I averaged feeding 52 days. In 2011, I averaged feeding 50 days, so you can see that was 310, 13. But the interesting thing is a day over there I was able to stop grazing both winters. March 29th, March 25th, March 28th, down to March 14th. I think people, they concentrate on extending it into the winter, but I think they're losing a lot of days by not getting grazing earlier enough in the spring. And this picture, I wish I'd had it last year with Kathy Vaughn and Scott Haygood. They could have had a good fight over this one. Kathy would have had all these good weeds for her cattle to eat, and Scott would have had all that he could have sprayed. They could have talked about this forever. But this picture was taken about the 14th of July, and that pasture hadn't been grazed since the 1st of April. And it doesn't look too good. I doubt if too many people want their pastures to look like this. And I know Robert was talking about how his was just ugly. And I thought, well, all the famous grazing systems, you got to have an acronym for them: the mob grazing, the MIG grazing, the rotational. And I couldn't make ugly work. So I was looking one day, and all of a sudden it hit me what I'm doing. It's the strategic leaving of pastures behind method, or slop grazing. But now this picture right here was taken the next day after I rotated those cows off. And you can see they didn't stomp everything down, but they got most of it. They ate you can't see in this picture, but they ate the leaves off of the mullein, and they stripped some of the rose bushes. They ate a few of the leaves off, and they really did a pretty good job. You can see in the background across the cross fence where what the pasture looked like when I started. But so I guess what I kind of do on slop grazing is, I went too far. About 60% of the farm I'll set up and just rotate normally like you would anytime on a 2 to 4 or 5 day rotation in April and May. Then the other 40%, I'll use it for summer stockpiling, and I'll mob graze it in June, July, and August when it's hot and dry. It's kind of what I do when grass is growing well. I'll rotate quickly, and then when it's not growing at all, or in the wintertime or dry, then I'll slow everything down and strip graze what I've got left. And then, of course, I repeat the process in September and October. I'll get back in on what I grazed in April and May, and that's when I'm calving, because trying to calve in this grass this tall, I can't make it work, because I've run over one calf last year trying to check them, and the poor thing was laying and I couldn't see it. Luckily, it didn't hurt it too bad. But so what I'll do is when I start calving, I'll move them into what I grazed in April and May, and it'll have pretty good regrowth. And then my winter grazing will be like this field right here. It'll have from July to December to regrow on its own. This is where I think people could improve a couple of weeks at spring turnout. I've got a saying that never grow hay and feed hay at the same time. And what I mean by that is if you make hay, generally March people get excited and they start cleaning their hayland up, move the cattle off of it if they've been feeding it onto their pasture. Then they can get out and fertilize, and by the middle of May they have some beautiful grass. And then by the 4th of July, when they get around the mowing, it's all dead. So Mike Altizer told me this, said, as soon as you mow your yard the first time in the spring, you ought to be able to start grazing. So I opened up all the land, and if you're making hay, go ahead and open your hay land and graze it lightly. Sometimes I may have a field that has 6 pastures. I'll be back in on it in 5 days, but I'll go through that 2 or 3 times, and by using this method, I haven't fed any hay after the first week of April in years. And I've got a friend that's got 700 cows, and he laughs. He said 1st of April, I'm done feeding hay. I don't care what it looks like, but it works. But you got to be real careful not to graze it too close, because the temptation is you'll have a little bit of residue left, and there's you're getting back on it and there's no regrowth, so well, I'll just leave them on here another day. Well, then they cut it too short and it may take a month for it to come back. I do a lot of summer stockpiling the last few years. Now, you can't really see it, but over where the cattle are, those are my weaned calves. They're 600-pound calves that I'll wean them, Fenceline wean them, and then bring them all together and commingle them. And this is, I call it first cutting hay. I used to make hay on all these fields. And it's getting ripe on top, but when you look down in it, it's got a lot of good pasture. And what I'll do on my summer stockpile, this is that 40% I've set aside and haven't grazed since April. I'll like the rougher fields, I'll turn the cows after I wean the calves. I'll let them mob it off, and then I'll use those for winter grazing. And I've been buying most of my hay, and this year I may buy it all. And to get the extra land to do this, you just put your hay land in. Instead of making that first cutting hay, you just graze it off in the summer. And then my example would be, you've got 150 acres and 50 cows. You mow 50 acres of hay and you have 100 acres of pasture. If you take that 50 acres of pasture and get the 40 days per 40 cow or 50 cows per day, you're going to pick up another 50 days twice. So that's 100 days. So instead of feeding 150, you're automatically down to feeding 100 days. Understand that? Or do I need to explain that again? But if you can get 50 days per acre, and you've got 50 cows, and you instead of making 50 acres of hay, that should give you 50 days in the summer to graze it. And then in the winter, it'll stockpile again. You get 50 more days, so you've picked up 100 days, and that leaves you 50 days to feed hay. So you've cut your hay by 2/3 and using the same land, same cattle. You just have to buy your hay then, which I don't know, I kind of enjoy it. I have a lot more time to play golf if I can haul hay and not have to make it. And by grazing these calves, the reason I did that was 2 years ago, I had about 50 acres of hay I mowed, and I was going to graze my calves on the regrowth. Well, it didn't rain from June till September, so I had no regrowth. So I said, well, I'll try it, and I mobbed these things off. The first year, they gained 1.9 pounds. This is from about 30 days from the 10th of June to the 4th of July. And then last year, the grass looked better, but it was hotter, and they only gained 1.4. But I think that's not too bad, considering they straight off their mother. And I've probably got 50 cents a day in it. So cost of gain's 20 to 35 cents on each pound I'm putting on. And I'm not selling my calves. I'm going to ship them to feed. So I think it's pretty economical. Plus, they go in and bush hog this land off. And this is what it looks like that's how much I'm leaving after the cattle have been on that field. And over on the left, I put that in. That's some burdock, and those calves stripped every blade off of it. But if they could just learn to eat it all the way to the root, it'd be all right, because this is going to come back. But they do eat them, but if you give them long rest periods, it's going to come right back. And this is my favorite picture. That's a 1,300-pound cow right there. I've sowed some switchgrass a few years ago, and that's really the only field I've got left. But this is around the 4th of July. I turned those cattle in. You can barely see the top of their head. And that's what that field looked like after I rotated them out. And then the next thing I do is on my winter stockpile. If you'll notice, you can barely see there's some polywire posts right up the middle. And these cows, I'm getting ready to move them, and there's 3 or 4 things I'd like to point out. See on the left how those calves, first thing they do, they go under the polywire and they creep graze all winter. And Then on the right, these old Hereford cows, if these were my Angus cows, they'd be standing down there waiting for me to take the fence down. The Herefords, they're just content to lay over there, and you can't really see it, but there's a lot of body condition 7 and 8s, because the Herefords survived from extinction for the last 30 years because they could live on nothing. So you bring them to Virginia and put them on good grass, they get so fat they can't walk. And I know what you're thinking, well, they don't give any milk, but the new Herefords they milk decent. They don't milk like an Angus, but they milk well enough. But I've been well pleased by getting some Hereford in these cows. They keep a lot better body condition, and I believe they're going to, over the long haul, they're going to hold up better by grazing some of this rougher pasture. And you look at it, that's not the best looking grass. It's a little bit of green under there, but they do pretty well on it. This picture was taken right after Christmas. We got a 2-inch ice storm. That shut me down for a couple of days, but it started to melt by then. And then this is a picture, and I'm not laying on my back. That field is that steep. But you can see, let me go back. That's what my grass looks like. And on the right are my calves, and on the left you can see the cows reaching under the poly wire. It's not the greatest looking pasture, but they've seemed to do real well on it. And the way I kind of stockpile is, Mike Gowash told me this 20 years ago, rotate real quickly in the fall, and what they leave behind is usually the fescue. So if you're not going to pull the cattle off, you can stockpile a lot of grass just by rotating quickly through it, and they'll eat the bluegrass and the orchard grass and the clover, and then the fescue, once it frosts, they'll come back and clean it up. And then the way I do most of it, I just pull the cattle off after I get done mobbing it off in July and leave it till November, December. And I can't get nitrogen as cheap as what everybody says it costs. And I think right now, for me, it's cheaper to buy the hay than it is the nitrogen. If I get 40 extra cow days per acre and it costs me $40 to get the 50 pounds of nitrogen down, that came to $1.94 a day, and I was feeding the hay for $1.85. And after that snow we had 3 winters ago, I try to have a 45 to 60 day hay supply just in case we get another one of those winters. And this is the Harmon farm. It was really dry over there 2 years ago. They had a half-inch of rain from the 1st of June to the 20th of September. And this is a really nice farm to winter graze. It faces south, but it dries out quickly. But so I only ended up with 62 cows over there. I started to take some more, and I thought, well, it'd be easier for me to feed them at home than it is over there. But we got 70% of those cows pregnant to the AI breeding. 91% of them were pregnant after the first heat cycle, or 30 days. Had 1 open cow, and I weaned 32 steer calves on June 8th, averaging 677 pounds. Now these calves would be 9-10 months old, and 30 heifer calves. So I'm convinced that you can run a high-performance animal through this system, and they'll work. You want to get my cow cost up. And I've got another budget. I'm sure y'all getting glad to see all these numbers, but and you may have to scroll it down. Along the top, my adjusted cow inventory. This is a spreadsheet. If anybody was interested, I could email it to you. We made up as Joe Razor and Mike, a bunch of us who do our cow cost everywhere, Dr. Whittier. But down here, this 68, and I weaned 62 calves. That's what the actual data was last winter. And then this year I'm running 70 cows, so I've kind of got a budget for that. And then on the far end, I've got, if I stocked it conventional and fed 150 days, what it would be, I'd run 100 cows and I'd feed 150. Can you slide it?
A little bit this way.
Yeah, that's too much. Let's go back a little more. But up top, I fed 19 days last year on the 62 cows. This year I'm projecting to feed 40 days and then 150. But I've kept the average weaning weight the same on each budget and the average price per pound. This is if I'd sold all the calves at weaning, and then the cull cow income. You can scroll down now to the expenses. Okay. And you can see, like on the depreciate, well, yeah, can you make that column there? Take that H column out.
Just take it out.
Or just make it narrow.
I got it.
All right, now scroll it over. The other way. All right, I think I can see that now. Well, I tried to adjust like depreciation. I figured if I had $65 a cow on the 62, I adjusted it for the 70 and for the 100. And like the fuel, since we're buying more hay and hauling more, the fuel went up. But you can come down, my big expense, 19% of the cow cost on this farm was rent. It dropped, when I added extra cows, it dropped from $115 per cow to $78. All right, you can scroll down. Well, you can see the hay difference, go back up, I'm sorry. The hay difference went from $32 a cow to $219 if I did conventional, and 60 feeding 40 days. All right, now you can scroll on down. I know y'all love this, but I do, so you're going to have to open. No, just come on down. I think I can find all that. No, I'm going to open up these two columns now. All right, and then this one over here, H. Well, this is what, when you look at along the bottom, the calf income, the net profit, counting all cost, 459, 425, and then over the other was 259. So I was about $200 less income with the more cows, but I've got 30 more calves to sell. And I'll tell you, scroll over one column. Too much.
Right there.
One more. Can you go? All right, that's close. But right here in the middle, you can kind of see it. With the 70 cows, I project I'll make $3,144 more dollars than I would with the 62. And if I had 100, I'd make $2,000 more. So I'd make more than what I'm doing with the 60, but it's going to take 176 more hours to make that $2,000, which came to $11 an hour. But here in the middle, by adding 8 cows, I increased my profit $3,000 because it's really not costing me. It's just maybe $30 more on hay. So by looking at these numbers, I think I'm better off to probably feed 45 days than I would try and stock a little bit heavier than I would if I was doing it real light and only feeding 19. But that could change if calf prices go down and hay goes up, it would change. But I thought that was interesting because Tim Sutphin always said, well, wouldn't you make more if you had more cattle? So I figured it up, and it would, but it's kind of a range. It's kind of like that chart that Harlan White used to have. The grass is growing and the quality goes down. There's an X in there somewhere, and I'm thinking that X is going to be in the 40 to 50 day feeding range just for this year. But the good thing is this system with the 70 cows is still very drought tolerant. The 105 days, if you get a dry year, you're going to be feeding 180. So I think there's a lot of risk to be on that far side and not a whole lot more income. So I think sometimes you can have a little bit less and make more per cow, and you end up with the same amount of dollars in your pocket. So if you believe any of that, I'm sorry, but that's just what I got to say.
All right.